What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for NFL Week 17. Final look.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over each position and break down a couple of my favorite players for this NFL DFS main slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Oh, and good news, guys. Make sure to stay tuned to the very end of this video because we removed the box that was popping up and blocking the lineup. So now you can see a full lineup using these picks that we made in this video if you stay to the very end. Okay, guys, NFL Week 17. So before we take a look at the quarterback position, let's take a look at the playoff picture. And we can see that the Chiefs are the only AFC team to clinch a playoff spot. So that means we got a lot of teams in the hunt or on the bubble here in the AFC. So the Titans, the Bengals, the Bills, the Colts, the Patriots, the Dolphins, all those guys are in the hunt. And on the bubble here, we got the Chargers, the Raiders, the Ravens, the Steelers, the Browns, the Broncos. So this should be a fun Week 17 because normally you get into Week 17 and there's not a lot of teams that have a lot to play for. So you got to be careful on the players that you pick. So for the AFC, maybe you shy away from the Kansas City Chiefs a little bit since they've already clinched the division and they don't want any injuries. I think they're still going to play and they're still going to be productive. But I think I would prefer to go with some of these teams in the hunt on the AFC side. So now for the NFC, you have teams that have clinched a playoff spot. The Packers, the Cowboys, the Rams, the Tampa Bay Bucks, and the Arizona Cardinals. So maybe this is the week to fade Cooper Kupp because they've clinched a playoff spot. They definitely don't want to push him and risk an injury. And same with the Tampa Bay Bucks. Possibly fade with some of these players, even though there's some good value plays on this team. They've got good matchup here versus the Jets. So, on the NFC, in the hunt, the 49ers and the Eagles. And then on the bubble, the Vikings, the Falcons, the Saints, and the Washington football team. Okay, so let's get back to the picks here. We're going to keep that in mind going forward. So at the quarterback position, I like Josh Allen from the Buffalo Bills playing the Atlanta Falcons, who have the 6th worst defense overall. They give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Josh Allen has averaged 26.3 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 6.8 rush attempts per game. He's going to be about 8% owned, projected at 24.8 fantasy points here in Week 17, and he's 8,000 DraftKings salary and 800 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 44 points scored in this game, with the Bills favored by 15. So this is a great matchup here. Now, because the Bills haven't clinched a playoff spot, I think they're going to go pretty hard here versus the Atlanta Falcons. And Josh Allen has scored 34, 22, and 42 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 12, 3, and 12 rush attempts. So I like Josh Allen here versus the Atlanta Falcons. Okay, so for the studs here, you got Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady, Matthew Stafford. So Josh Allen is the only stud on the slate who has not clinched a playoff berth, and he's got a fantastic matchup. And of course, we know he's got unbelievable upside with that rushing floor. So I think Josh Allen is my favorite stud pick on the quarterback slate, or on the slate for quarterbacks. Now, if you want to save some salary here, another team that's fighting for their playoff life is Joe Burrow from the Cincinnati Bengals playing the Kansas City Chiefs, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. They give up the 5th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks, Joe Burrow has averaged 20.7 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 2.3 rush attempts per game. He's only going to be about 3% owned, so I think Joe Burrow is a pretty interesting sleeper pick here. He's projected at 19.7 fantasy points here in Week 17. He's $6,900 DraftKings salary, $800 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 51 points scored in this game, with the Bengals trailing by 4.5. So high-scoring game, good matchup, passing game script, and Joe Burrow has scored 41, 13, and 25 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 2, 5, and 2 rush attempts. So I like Joe Burrow here versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Okay, another team that is fighting for their playoff life. Let's see where they are. The Eagles, they're in the hunt, so they're going to want to win this game. The Philadelphia, so I like Jalen Hurts from the Philadelphia Eagles playing the Washington football team, who have the second worst defense overall. They give up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks, and Jalen Hurts has averaged 22.6 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 9.4 rush attempts per game. He's going to be about 6% owned, projected at 21.6 fantasy points here in Week 17. He's $6,600 DraftKings salary, $1,300 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 45 points scored in this game, with the Eagles favored by 4.5. So a relatively close competitive game here and a fantastic matchup. And Jalen Hurts has scored 17 and 30 fantasy points in the last 2 games. He got 2 and 8 rush attempts in those games. So I like Jalen Hurts here versus the Washington football team. Okay, now if you're looking for a low salary, low ownership quarterback from a team that's fighting for their playoff life, you got the New England Patriots, and they are in the hunt as well this week, so they need to win this game. So this guy, his salary is just really low. Now, he doesn't put up a ton of fantasy points all that often, but he is an awesome quarterback, and he's facing a team here that's not all that good. So it could be a Week 17 show here for Mac Jones from the New England Patriots playing the Jacksonville Jaguars, who have the 12th worst defense overall. They give up the 12th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Now, Mac Jones has only averaged 14.1 fantasy points per game on the season. He gets an average of 2.6 rush attempts per game. He's going to be about 4% owned, projected at 16.7 fantasy points here in Week 17. He's only $5,300 DraftKings salary. He's $1,500 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 41.5 points scored in this game, and Vegas thinks that they're favored by 16.5. So looks like they're going to score the bulk of the points in this game. Now, Mac Jones, his last 4 games, 7, 19, 25, and 11. So he does have that 20-plus fantasy point upside, might flash it about 50% of the time, and his salary is just really low. He's got low ownership, and this is a game that the Patriots need to win versus a bad team. And Vegas thinks they're going to score most of the points in this game. So I just have a feeling that if you want to take an outside shot, kind of a dart throw play here, and you want to go with a low salary quarterback, take a look at Mac Jones here versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, speaking of low salary quarterbacks, we know that Jimmy Garoppolo is out. So let's take a look at San Francisco 49ers. Let's see, are they playing for the yes, they are in the hunt as well. So they need to win this game. So this is an interesting high risk, high reward play, low salary. So take a look at Trey Lance from the San Francisco 49ers playing the Houston Texans, who have the third worst defense overall. They're middle of the pack defending opposing quarterbacks. So Trey Lance will be the starting quarterback for the 49ers, and he's going to be about 9% owned, projected at 19.5 fantasy points here in week 17. He's only 4,800 DraftKings salary. He's 1,600 more on FanDuel. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 43.5 points scored in this game, with the 49ers favored by 12.5. So I think he's another dart throw play here that if you just want to save money on your quarterback and hope that they can get 20 plus fantasy points, so you have the rest of that salary to stack studs in the other positions, I like Trey Lance here versus the Houston Texans. Okay guys, it's time to announce the winner of our holiday special $100 PayPal giveaway. And the winner is Haslin Roberts. Haslin Roberts, congratulations. You are the winner of this holiday special $100 PayPal giveaway. Congratulations. Please reply to our comment to collect your prize.
Before I continue with the picks, I'm excited today because we added a new contest for everyone watching.
If you want to enter the drawing for $25 PayPal,
all you need to do is like this video, hit that subscribe button, and make a quick comment below to be entered into the drawing. We'll reply to a random comment and let you know that you won.
And we'll send you $25 PayPal.
So it's that easy, and we pick a new winner every Saturday and announce them in our video. So get your comment in now so I can add another entry for you.
Okay, let's take a look at the running back position. Okay, so another team that is in the hunt in the AFC. So you know this guy is going to get all the carries he can handle in this game to make sure they win this game. So I like Jonathan Taylor from the Indianapolis Colts playing the Las Vegas Raiders, who have a middle of the pack defense overall, and they give up the 6th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Jonathan Taylor has averaged 25 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 19.8 rush attempts per game and 3 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 23% owned, so he is the chalk play of the slate, and he's projected at 23.8 fantasy points here in week 17. He's 9,000 DraftKings salary, 1,000 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 44.5 points scored in this game, with the Colts favored by 7. So great matchup here. Jonathan Taylor has scored 14, 26, and 28 fantasy points in the last 3 games, off of 27, 29, and 32 rush attempts. And he had 2 pass targets last game. So just a ton of volume. It's been productive almost all season long, but especially in his last 5 games. Since they finally started giving him the ball, he's been crushing it. So I like Jonathan Taylor here versus the Las Vegas Raiders. Okay, so Damian Harris, I do like this play, but he's been limited in practice. So if Damian Harris is out, that's also going to make me think that Mac Jones low salary quarterback pick has a little bit more value. But if Damian Harris does play, I like him here versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, because it could turn into a running game script if the Patriots get ahead of this Jacksonville Jaguars, which I think will happen. It's going to be 6,600 DraftKings salary, 800 more on FanDuel, and only about 2% owned, so low ownership play. And he scored 31 fantasy points last game, 20 fantasy points the game before that, off of 18 and 10 rush attempts. So if Damian Harris plays, I think he's a pretty interesting sleeper pick here versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. Okay, now this team is not in the playoffs, but this player is just in a great spot, and it's hard to ignore him on this slate here. So I like David Montgomery from the Chicago Bears playing the New York Giants, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. They give up the 7th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. David Montgomery has averaged 15.6 fantasy points per game on the season getting an average of 16.6 rush attempts per game and 4.2 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 27% owned, projected at 16.7 fantasy points here in Week 17. He's 6,500 DraftKings salary and 700 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 37 points scored in this game, with the Chicago Bears favored by 6. So you got a good matchup here. Could be a running game script. And David Montgomery has scored 24, 12, and 14 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 21, 18, and 10 rush attempts on top of 9, 6, and 7 pass targets. So he's been like a wide receiver and a running back in the same player for the past few games. And I expect that to continue this week. Obviously a high ownership play here, so a lot of people are liking this pick. So I like David Montgomery here versus the New York Giants. Okay, now let's stick with the teams that are fighting for their playoff life here. So at the running back position, you got the Las Vegas Raiders, who are on the bubble. So they're going to want to win this game to give themselves a chance to get into the playoffs. So I like Josh Jacobs from the Las Vegas Raiders playing the Indianapolis Colts, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they've been pretty good versus opposing running backs. But Josh Jacobs has averaged 14.7 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 13.5 rush attempts per game and 4.5 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 12% owned, projected at 15.6 fantasy points here in Week 17. He's 6,200 DraftKings salary, 400 more on FanDuel. Josh Jacobs has scored 15, 12, and 11 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 27, 15, and 9 rush attempts on top of 3, 4, and 6 pass targets. So he got 30 touches last week, and Vegas thinks there's going to be 44.5 points scored in this game, with the Raiders trailing by 7. So I think he's a pretty good play here. The Raiders need to win, and I think they're going to lean on this running game if they can get it going. So I like Josh Jacobs here versus the Indianapolis Colts. Okay, now even though the Tampa Bay Bucks, they've got a spot in the playoffs already. Let's see here. Yes, they've clinched a playoff spot, but I do think that this guy's going to get some action. So I just want to bring him up here. I like Ronald Jones from the Tampa Bay Bucks playing the New York Jets, who have the worst defense overall, and they give up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Ronald Jones, he scored 16 fantasy points last week off of 20 rush attempts and 3 pass targets. There's no Leonard Fournette. Their pass catchers are struggling with injuries. So Ronald Jones is going to be about 19% owned. He could get a ton of work here in this game. He's projected at 15.1 fantasy points here in Week 17. He's 6,300 DraftKings salary, 700 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 45.5 points scored in this game, with the Tampa Bay Bucks favored by 13. So best possible matchup on the slate probably will be a running game script. So I could see Ronald Jones getting 20 plus touches. He could have a big day here versus the Jets. So I like Ronald Jones here versus the New York Jets. Okay, let's take a look at the wide receiver position. So we mentioned the Rams already have their playoff spot locked up. Now Cooper Kupp's got a great matchup here versus the Baltimore Ravens, but I'm just thinking that it is possible that this is the week to fade Cooper Kupp. They might want to take it easy on Cooper Kupp this week and not risk injury to their star or their stud player going into the playoffs. So I'm going to be a little cautious with this pick here this week. Even though he's going to be about 18% owned, he is 9,500 DraftKings salary, 700 more on FanDuel. And the Baltimore Ravens have the 5th worst defense overall, give up the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. So on paper, this is a fantastic play here this week. I'm just going to be a little bit cautious because of the Rams having locked up that playoff spot. It's possible that they don't run as many routes to him, just don't want to give him 15 targets and have him get hit 15 times and risk injury every single one of those hits. So I'm going to be cautious on Cooper Kupp here versus the Baltimore Ravens. Now, the other stud on the slate, Deebo Samuel, he's got that new quarterback coming in, so I'm going to be cautious with Deebo Samuel. He's expensive, only going to be about 1% owned, but this also is going to be an interesting sleeper pick because if that quarterback comes in for Jimmy Garoppolo and is able to throw the ball, which, hey, they're professional quarterbacks, they should be able to throw the ball. If he does his job, Deebo Samuel could be a sneaky pick here. If Cooper Kupp doesn't get as many pass targets as he's used to, Deebo Samuel could be that sleeper pick at only 1% ownership. But the guy that I'm looking at, the stud that makes the most sense on the slate, is Stefan Dix from the Buffalo Bills playing the Atlanta Falcons, who have the 6th worst defense overall. They give up the 4th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Stefan Diggs has averaged 17.2 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 9.5 pass targets per game. He's on the field for 82% of the snaps, going to be about 14% owned, projected at 18.4 fantasy points here in week 17. He's 7,900 DraftKings salary, 100 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 44 points scored in this game, with the Bills favored by 15. So great matchup here. Stefan Diggs has scored 22, 14, and 14 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 13, 7, and 13 pass targets. So a team that needs to win here this week, I like Stefan Diggs here versus the Atlanta Falcons.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all the tools for NFL, MLB is still going, NBA is right around the corner. This is a great time to get in and try everything for 1 month. The tools are all about saving research time. You can see the last 3 games, the fantasy points per game, the targets they got per game, so you can see how involved they are in the offense, the rushes they got per game. Seeing all this stuff on one screen helps you save time and make better picks. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, another team that is in the hunt in the AFC, I like A.J. Brown from the Tennessee Titans playing the Miami Dolphins, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. They give up the 7th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. A.J. Brown has averaged 15.2 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 8.6 pass targets per game. He's on the field for 83% of the snaps, going to be about 14% owned, projected at 17.4 fantasy points here in week 17. He's 7,200 DraftKings salary, 300 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 39.5 points scored in this game, with the Tennessee Titans favored by 4. So A.J. Brown has scored 35, 10, and 3 fantasy points in the last 3 games, off of 16, 9, and 4 pass targets. So lots of volume the past couple of games, exploded last week, and he's in a good matchup here in a game they need to win. So I like A.J. Brown here versus the Miami Dolphins. Okay, now the Dolphins are also in the hunt here in the AFC. So I like Jalen Waddle from the Miami Dolphins playing the Tennessee Titans, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. They give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Jalen Waddle has averaged 16.3 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 9.1 pass targets per game. He's on the field for 82% of the snaps, going to be about 8% owned, projected at 15.9 fantasy points here in week 17. He's 6,700 DraftKings salary, 300 more on FanDuel, and Jalen Waddle has scored 25 and 18 fantasy points in his last 2 games off of 12 and 11 pass targets. He is by far the number 1 target on the team, so I like Jalen Waddle here versus the Tennessee Titans. Okay, now for the Cincinnati Bengals, if you're looking for a sleeper pick, this is probably one of my favorite picks on the slate. I don't know why his ownership is not more than what it is. So I like Tyler Boyd from the Cincinnati Bengals playing the Kansas City Chiefs. Remember, the Bengals are fighting for their playoff life, and the Kansas City Chiefs already have that spot locked up. So I'm not going to say the Kansas City Chiefs aren't going to play hard, but they could play a little soft here in this game. And the Kansas City Chiefs have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, middle-of-the-pack defending opposing wide receivers. Tyler Boyd has averaged 11.6 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5.9 pass targets per game. He's only going to be about 2% owned. He's on the field for 77% of the snaps, and Tyler Boyd has scored 18, 21, and 10 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 5, 6, and 5 pass targets. So the Vegas thinks there's going to be 51 points scored in this game, with the Bengals trailing by 4.5. So I like this pick for a lot of reasons. Because of what I just mentioned, with the Kansas City Chiefs having that playoff seed locked up, possibly going to play a little soft, and then it's going to be a high-scoring game, 51 points scored in this game. Could be a passing game script if the Chiefs strike early. So, and then Tyler Boyd, he's been productive almost throughout the whole season. And so I think he's a low salary pick, a low ownership pick, a guy that's got 20 plus fantasy point upside. Just everything seems to be sounding the radar here for Tyler Boyd here versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Okay, moving on to the tight end position. So the stud on the slate that I like is Travis Kelce from the Kansas City Chiefs playing the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, I know the Kansas City Chiefs have that spot locked up, but, I mean, they're going to put an effort in here, and I think this guy could rack up some early fantasy points, and he's got a great matchup versus the Cincinnati Bengals, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. They give up the 7th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Travis Kelce has averaged 17.8 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 8.7 pass targets per game, and he's going to be about 7% owned, on the field for 83% of the snaps. So I like this pick, even though the Kansas City Chiefs have their playoff spot. He didn't play last week, so I think that they may want to give this guy some pass targets and keep him active and sharp going into the playoffs. And he's projected at 17.8 fantasy points here in week 17. He's 7,300 DraftKings salary, 900 more on FanDuel. So if I'm going to play a Kansas City Chief player, it's going to be Travis Kelce here versus the Cincinnati Bengals. Okay, now George Kittle is in the same spot as Deebo Samuel. We don't know what we're going to get with that quarterback that's coming in for Jimmy Garoppolo, but I think he's an interesting pick here, actually, because if that quarterback does his job, George Kittle from the San Francisco 49ers playing the Houston Texans, who have the 3rd worst defense overall. They give up the 5th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. George Kittle has averaged 16.5 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 7.1 pass targets per game. He's on the field for 100% of the snaps, only going to be about 2% owned, projected at 15.5 fantasy points here in week 17. He's 7,100 DraftKings salary, 200 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 43.5 points scored in this game, with the 49ers favored by 12.5. Now, George Kittle has scored 4, 15, and 37 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 3, 6, and 15 pass targets.
So I'm looking at George Kittle as a possible safety net for the new quarterback coming in. Sorry I'm not naming him by name. Let me check. What is his name? His name is... I just talked about him, but I got a memory like a goldfish. So Trey Lance from the San Francisco 49ers. He's coming in for Jimmy Garoppolo. And I think that George Kittle could be the safety net here. And George Kittle's got some monster upside. So the reason I like this pick is because he's got a fantastic matchup. It's a game the 49ers need to win. And George Kittle's only going to be about 2% owned. So if he goes off and has one of those 30-plus fantasy point games, if he gets, 10-plus pass targets as the safety net, breaks some tackles, scores a touchdown, then this guy could be a pretty interesting player here this week at only 2% ownership. So I like George Kittle here versus the Houston Texans. Okay, another tight end that's going to be low owned here in a game that the Bills need to win is Dawson Knox from the Buffalo Bills playing the Atlanta Falcons, who have the 6th worst defense overall, and they're middle of the pack defending opposing tight ends. Dawson Knox has averaged 12.2 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 4.9 pass targets per game. He's on the field for 86% of the snaps, only going to be about 2% owned, projected at 10.4 fantasy points here in week 17. He's $5,500 DraftKings salary, $700 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 44 points scored in this game, with the Bills favored by 15. So we know the Bills need to win this game, and they've got a good matchup here versus the Falcons, which I believe are also on the bubble. So the Falcons have like a super outside shot of making the playoffs. So this should be a competitive game. So I like this game. I think it's an interesting game to stack. And we didn't mention him at the running back position, but let me just jump back because the Falcons do want to win this game. So I like Cordell Patterson from the Atlanta Falcons, only going to be about 1% owned. This is a guy who's a super dynamic player. Now, he hasn't scored much the past couple of weeks, but he's got a good matchup here versus the Bills, who give up the 10th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. He's averaging 16.5 fantasy points per game on the season. So if you do want to stack this Bills-Falcons game, Cordell Patterson would be the player from the Falcons that I would play. And at only 1% ownership, Cordell Patterson could put up one of those 30-plus fantasy point games that he was doing earlier in the season. So I just wanted to bring that play up. So back to the tight end position, Dawson Knox here at the Buffalo Bills versus the Atlanta Falcons. Now, if you want to save some salary at the tight end position, these guys are not in the playoff hunt here, but I think they're still in good spots. They're low salary. They've got good matchups. So I like Noah Fant and Gerald Everett. And Noah Fant only going to be about 1% owned. He's $4,400 DraftKings salary, $900 more on FanDuel. He's playing the LA Chargers, who have the 7th worst defense overall, and they give up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. So Noah Fant has averaged 9.7 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5.8 pass targets per game. He's really underperformed this season, so I'm just thinking it's the last game of the season. He's got a fantastic matchup. He's going to want to put in a good effort here versus the Chargers. So as a sleeper pick, I like Noah Fant here versus the LA Chargers. And just similar to Gerald Everett, he's another sleeper pick, team that's not fighting they're not going to be in the playoffs. He's from the Seattle Seahawks playing the Detroit Lions, who have the 4th worst defense overall. They give up the 9th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Gerald Everett has averaged 8.5 fantasy points per game on the season, and he's only going to be about 2% owned, projected at 8.8 fantasy points here in week 17. He's $4,100 DraftKings salary, $1,100 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 41.5 points scored in this game, with the Seahawks favored by 7.5. And remember, I think the Seahawks team, I think this is the bet of the week. If you are into sports betting, I think you should buy the point and go with the Seattle Seahawks by 6.5 here versus the Detroit Lions. Neither of these teams are playing for anything, but I think the Seattle Seahawks have a lot to prove here in this game. So I think they're going to give a pretty good effort here, and they're all healthy. And Russell Wilson hasn't been playing that well. He's going to want to put in a good final game. So if you guys want more sports betting picks, more sports betting content, please leave a like down below. Leave a comment down below and say, yes, we want sports betting picks. So I know that you guys are interested in sports betting content. Maybe we'll do a NFL sports betting video once or twice a week. We could get into some NBA and MLB content as well. Try to get that up on the site as well on the Draft Dashboard for all of you members or anyone interested in that 30-day trial. I'll let you know if we're going to do that. If we get those comments and we see from you guys that you guys want sports betting content, we'll put in the extra time and we'll get it up there. So Gerald Everett, he scored 17, 10, and 11 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 5, 4, and 2 pass targets. So if you are looking for a low salary tight end who is low ownership, you want to make your lineup different, I think both of these guys, Noah Fant and Gerald Everett, are both good low salary, low ownership tight end plays that have good matchups, and they've got some upside here in week 17.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video.
Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smiggity smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.